I wanted to do a quick webcast or screencast in which we discuss some of the citation uh, issues and some of the paraphrasing issues that we've been discussing in class. I'm actually sitting out by the baseball diamond SHP playing Carlmont. I hear swimming in the background. There's lacrosse going on. It's a beautiful afternoon. So anyhow, as all that's going on, you and I, all of us, we're going to discuss some really fascinating stuff like paraphrasing and citation format. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, we talked a little bit about the format of these paragraphs, that you have these three sections that you're working with, these three periods of time. Let's imagine that we're going to write a political. So this is our, let's say this will be our political paragraph. So again, we're covering three periods of time. So 1885 to independence, whenever that might be. Independence to the year 1990. And then more or less 1990 to modern day. So if we take that as our framework, for these middle sections, let's imagine, and this is a northern African country, but let's imagine that my nation is Algeria. And I do some reading through my databases, and I discover this story from 1885 relative to the independence period. So I might say, for example, about Algeria, beginning in the 1830s. Now I know this is going back a little bit earlier, but that's the story for Algeria. Algeria became a French-controlled province with more than 1 million French citizens moving to Algeria and seizing native lands. Now, let's say I get this from an ABC Clio database. My citation is going to come at the very end of this, and before I put a punctuation mark on it, I'll have ABC-Clio, and let's say my article is just the main reference article. I'll hopefully have remembered the title for that article, and I can include it in the citation. Now, this sort of one-sentence description of this early period came from a much longer, about two-paragraph synopsis of what happened in this early period. So you can see, right, the goal is to distill this down into one streamlined, or maybe two streamlined sentences. So now, if we're looking for the year of independence, we'll have one more sentence, let's add, because there is stuff that goes on up to independence. Beginning in the year 1954 in Algeria, the Algerian people, I'm going to say, mobilized a 7-year revolutionary war effort, which was led by a radical group known as the Algerian National Liberation Front. Now, it's not often that I'm going to have proper names in there, but this is a pretty important fact. There's this really powerful radical group. And their efforts of this group, this ultimately culminated or resulted in French President Charles de Gaulle declaring Algerian independence in the year 1962. Now, all of this information came from the CIA World Factbook. And again, the way I would title that is with the article title Algeria and period at the end. So I have two sentences that get me up to independence. Now we know that independence came in 1962. The next part, let's say, up to 1990. So I would talk about this as a whole. So the years 1962 to 1990 as a whole, I'm going to say were marked by, or sort of the defining events were marked by extreme civil unrest. I'm going to say sparked by, again, a lot of sort of just descriptive words, sparked by government corruption. I don't have to say what kind, right? But I know from the article that the government's corrupt. Government corruption and high unemployment. Both of those were going on. All of which led to a series of bloody riots in the year 1988. So you can see, right, it's a combination, government corruption, and you can see it's a combination of specificity on the one hand and generality. I don't need to know, for example, who it is that's being corrupt and how high the unemployment is. I just know that there were these issues going on that led to a series of bloody riots. Now, this came from two sources. For this, I'm going to include the Oxford Encyclopedia of Africa, again with the article title Algeria, and then a semicolon to separate to another source. And this was also the CIA World Factbook, and again with the article title Algeria. So I've now covered pretty much up to the year 1990. Here 1988 is the important period. The last bit I'll cover from 1990 up to modern day. And again, you're just looking to describe a 25 or 30 year period. So in this case, I'm going to say in the last 25 years, what occurred before this political unrest has continued. But there were attempts, so this has continued despite democratic elections and despite attempts by the Algerian government to promote peace in this region. And they did this through a very specific program, especially through the year 2000, they called Civil Harmony Law. And the purpose of this, it offered amnesty to armed guerrilla fighters. Now, this came from a very specific place. Let's say this came from, again, ABC Clio. But now my article looks at the Civil Harmony Law. So this will distinguish it from the more general article on Algeria in general. Periods, just about a sentence, and you're kind of trying to capture what the nature of that period of time is as a whole. And if I'm to add a concluding sentence, what I would do is say something specific, right, to cover all of this together. It's not a very happy or peaceful place, it doesn't seem. So I would say something like, and it's a pretty formulaic way to say it, all told, Algeria's story is, and it can be whatever your story for your nation is, but I'm going to say this story is one of perpetual political upheaval and dissatisfaction. So, this goes together pretty well. If I was simply to erase these markers and sort of condense this down, I more or less have the building blocks for my paragraph. Now, I want to point out one thing, and that's how you paraphrase from the specific writing in an article to what I've done here. Let me point you to quickly this general reference article on Algeria and point you to the text here about the Civil Harmony Law. Now it turns out that there's not actually an article about this civil harmony law, but if we scroll down to the bottom and about what's going on, sort of the efforts of the government in the modern era, we see a discussion. Let me find it here. It says, despite this national peace plan and civil harmony law that provided amnesty for guerrillas. Well, let's take that for example. Now, I will copy and I will paste it into my document. Let's just take a look at what that looks like. So, I include this year and I include this civil harmony law. And if I was to do something like, let's see, so I have even despite in here, but these attempts by the Algerian government to promote peace. Now, if I was to say, right, a civil harmony law that offered amnesty to armed guerrillas, that's pretty close to a civil harmony law that provided amnesty to guerrillas. But the phrasing in here is different enough. It's different enough that this doesn't actually require quotations around it. It's not just that some of the words have been changed, but in fact the sentence structure, starting with despite, is very different than the sentence structure here. And there are key points in this that are missing, right? So I've excluded this idea of a national peace plan. I've taken away this country's armed conflict. I've talked about guerrillas who surrendered, removed that. And it's simply one or two little ideas. This, in fact, would be a pretty effective paraphrase. Maybe not perfect, but effective enough for it to be in my own words. So the last thing I'm going to do now, let's go ahead and condense all of this down. Well, we'll leave it here for a second. Is I'm going to think about my topic sentence. Now, for the topic sentences in general, we can use almost like a formula in which what we're trying to do is capture what's going on in this independence period, in this middle period, and in modern day, in one word or even a phrase. And what I would say is, we know, for example, in this independence period, the main things were French colonialism and Revolutionary War. Revolutionary War on the one hand, and I'm even gonna put a because I think this is the case just based on what I've read. I'm gonna call it aggressive French colonialism and aggressive French colonialism and Revolutionary War. Now the middle period, I need something. I'm gonna say here. Civil unrest and bloodshed after independence. And for the last one, covering that last period of time, finally, continued unrest despite attempts to bring peace. Now, I've more or less said exactly what I said in these longer sentences, but in a phrase. This isn't a perfect topic sentence, but what it does is it gives me this entire period of time, and it gives me this whole snapshot of what's going on in the sort of political realm, such that if I erase all of the breaks between these sentences, all of a sudden it's not, again, not perfect yet, but I have what is let's count the sentences once it's all done. I have a well cited, so all my citations are in place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentence paragraph. Yours might be a little bit longer, depending on the information you want to include, but this is about the level of detail you should be looking for. So anyway, what I would say is you can use this as an introductory guide and maybe a reference to come back to complement what we're going to discuss in class. So all best of luck with your own writing.